predictable weekend's results in the finals this week, but there's still a bit to talk about there, and also a fair bit brewing down in Adelaide Crows land. So why don't we just crack right in and get amongst it. I did not unmute myself. That whole intro that was a piece of absolute TV art, and I didn't unmute myself. That's what happens when I don't have Macca around to pull me up. So sorry, Vardy and PJ, I'm sure you can hear me now, can you? There it is. Fantastic. Oh my god. It wouldn't be a CrowCast without some sort of stupidity. But never mind. As I said, it's just going to be me. Macca is somewhere. I don't know where he is, but he's not here. And and Nicky's called in sick. So it's just going to be me. So why don't we quickly just have a look at the... why don't we just have a look firstly at the finals results, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat about what's going on at West Lakes. Anyone that's on the chat, if you've got a bit to add, it would be great. We're interactive still, but with my cohorts absent, I reckon it's going to be a fairly quick one. So anyway, on Friday night, Richmond 12-8-80 to St Kilda 6-13-49, a margin there of 31 points. St Kilda a little bit of bad kicking, but Richmond looked very, very powerful. The question that we had last week on the cast was whether St Kilda could maintain their shape and their form and their discipline. In the end, they just couldn't convert, really. And I felt like Richmond came out with a fair bit of purpose on the night, and look, it would have been a big ask of St Kilda to overcome Richmond in that kind of form, and that seemed to be the case. G'day to Kempy as well on Discord. Macca on the tits, I reckon you're right. So look, just a couple of things about Richmond. I still think they're playing arrogant. I still think they're playing a bit like an entitled team. They certainly had the wood over St Kilda for most of the night, but I felt like some of their efforts just smacked of a bit of arrogance, and Brisbane showed that if you can stay with them over the course of the match and maintain your pressure for the course of the match, Richmond are beatable. So they come up against Port Adelaide next week, and that's going to be a ripper of a prelim because Port Adelaide are playing with a lot of confidence and a lot of belief and a lot of team ethos, I guess you'd say. And whether they can resist Richmond's manic forward running will be very interesting to see. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm still thinking Port might just get up over Richmond. I think Richmond's attitude isn't quite right. I think the coach is trying to promote this unsociable football kind of thing. But by the same token, I think that they just lack a little bit of discipline. I think Tom Lynch again showed that he lacks a little bit of different discipline. The only thing that's going to do the power in, I think, is the bloody umpiring. Because I don't know about you guys in chat, but to me, they miss so much of what Richmond do. The little flicks, the little handoffs that should be called throws, the high tackles, the high fend-offs. They just get away with so much, Richmond. And if you were a St Kilda supporter on Friday night, you would have been yelling at the TV because, whilst St Kilda struggled to maintain any sort of pressure, when they did apply pressure or when they did get up in Richmond's grill, Richmond were just flouting the rules, in my opinion. Just flouting the rules in many respects, and the umpires didn't seem to want to pull them up. Anyway, so on Saturday we had an absolute belting. West Coast must be wondering how the hell Collingwood beat them. Because I tell you what, they were either fatigued because of the travel, or they just had one game left in them, which is what Nathan Buckley seemed to suggest, that they played one game too many. But they were absolutely woeful, and in the end, the scoreboard actually flattered them, in my opinion. They were lucky to kick 5 goals in the end. Geelong 15-10, 100 to Collingwood 5-2, 32. I guess the question is, was it a case of Geelong being that good, or was it a case of Collingwood being that bad? Geelong certainly started off very strongly, but I think they benefited from being able to play Dangerfield forward for large portions of the match because Collingwood's midfield just wasn't accountable. None of their midfielders really showed any sort of intensity, and it was chalk and cheese compared to the game against West Coast the previous week. And as a consequence, Geelong, or Chris Scott, could afford to do his favourite trick of playing Dangerfield up forward. And Dangerfield, I would like a survey on Discord. My view is that Dangerfield is the best player of the last 20 years in the AFL. He is an absolute champion. And I've got to say, I know hindsight's a beautiful thing. And I know that he wanted to go back and play at Moggs and live at Moggs and be king of Geelong and all the rest of it. But do you reckon there's a case that Adelaide should have made him the highest paid player in the history of the AFL to try and keep him? I really think there's a case to be made for Adelaide throwing every last cent at Danger just to get another contract out of him and make him the highest paid player in the AFL, because he is an absolute star. I don't think I've seen a better player in his vein since Michael Voss. I think he plays in many ways quite similar to Michael Voss, but at the moment he's playing like a bloke who knows that this might be his last chance for a premiership with this Geelong team, because I reckon with a couple of retirements and blokes just getting a little bit older, they may just be at the end of their window. And he's playing like a bloke who made the move for a number of reasons, but including winning a flag in his hometown. And he's just unstoppable at the moment. Vardy in the chat says he didn't leave for money. Vardy, I know he didn't leave for money. I know it was a family thing. I know it was all about lifestyle, etc. But could he have ignored 1.5 million a year over 5 years? Could he have ignored that? It's. I would have liked to have seen Adelaide test that. I would have liked to have seen them ask that question, because he deserves to be the highest paid player in the AFL. We had him, so he was ours to lose. And was the lure of Moggs Creek strong enough to resist 1.5 million over 5 years? Was it worth $7.5 million? I don't know. We'll never know. We'd never get a straight answer from Danger, but he's going to carry this Geelong team into a preliminary final. And the way Geelong are playing, it's touch and go, in my opinion. Brisbane were very, very solid against Richmond the previous week. They took everything that Richmond had to throw at them. And I think Richmond have got more weapons than Geelong. Geelong rely on a few. Danger obviously being one of them. They rely on Hawkins being on top of his game. They rely on touches from Selwood. They rely on touches from Duncan. And they rely on, or they have been reliant on, Lockie Henderson down back, who's had a very good final series so far. But I don't think they've got the same amount of weapons. I don't think they can hit you from as many angles as what Richmond can. And if Brisbane bring the same level of intensity and commitment and concentration and effort over 4 quarters, I don't know. I don't think Geelong get up next week over Brisbane. So I'm tipping a Brisbane v Richmond rematch in the grand final. I think I don't think Port will have enough firepower. Put it this way: Port are going to have to do everything right, in my opinion, to get over Richmond. All their stars are going to have to fire. They're going to need big games out of their guns. And they're also going to need big games out of their bit players, their second tier. If it's left to too few, then I think Port may struggle. So I think it's going to be a Brisbane-Richmond GF. I think it's going to be a classic based on the final last week that they played. And Brisbane at their home ground, wouldn't it be great? Well, a bit of a Cinderella story, I think, for Brisbane on the back of a complete rebuild of that club, administratively and also from a player's perspective. They had the exodus not so long ago. What was that, about 5 years ago? And since then they've been slowly building, and I wouldn't begrudge them anything. Marco in the chat says he'd like to see the Cats smash Port by 118 in the final. That would be a classic. It really would, especially in their 255,000th anniversary. But I think it'll be closer than that. Port will give it a good shake, but I'm just leaning towards Richmond in that game. I don't think Port make the GF, to be honest with you. So that's the finals out of the way. And as I mentioned, I'm running a bit blind here because I haven't got my cohorts. Macca, if you're listening, thanks, mate. But we will get through it. I'm just calling up the AFC website here. We do have a few things that have gone on in Crow's Land. Let's have a look and see if we can call up what's been happening since our last podcast. We had a couple of re-signings. One was quite surprising, I've got to say. We had Benny Keys re-signed for 2, which I thought was a really good re-signing. Benny Keys. It's not even on there. Let's have a look at it. And I will go through the AFLW draft as well in a second. No, show more. Anyway, we had we had Benny Key signed for 2. That was not unexpected at all. But Kieran Strawn has got signed up for another year now. Didn't impress me. Didn't look anywhere near an AFL level football, either up forward or in the ruck. In his one outing, he has looked okay at SANFL level, but in his one AFL outing, he looked slow, he looked cumbersome. Obviously, he competed okay in the ruck, but so he should. He's 200 odd centimetres. But I don't know. It smacks a bit of a Patrick Wilson extension. We're never gonna play Patrick Wilson. Patrick Wilson would have almost been last selected on the list, and yet he got kept on. Kieran Strawn the same. Obviously, it seems like he's been kept as ruck insurance, which I guess is fair enough. But we do have the Berg and we do have Frampton, who can both ruck in a pinch. Certainly not A-grade ruckman by any stretch, but given the nature of the game at the moment, it's debatable whether you need more than one A-grade ruckman on your list. Vardy's asking whether it's as a rookie. I'm not sure. I think it is. I think he's been re-signed as a rookie, but we don't even know what the list makeup's going to be yet, so I don't know. No. PJ asks, does it indicate we aren't going tall in the draft? PJ, that was my first thought. I actually thought that re-signing Strawn essentially meant that we weren't going to go for Riley Tilthorpe. I don't think we're going to go for Tilthorpe anyway, but it seemed to me that by keeping Kieran on for another year, we basically signalled that we're not going to go for Tilthorpe. But who knows? I mean, they may just think that Tilthorpe's a bit green and wouldn't be up to rucking in his first season, and they needed Strawn for another year. So, I don't know. That was a funny one as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, there it is. The other one was, of course, the pardon me, the sanctions that eventually were handed down by the AFL, which surprised me a little bit. Sanctions handed down by the AFL on Stengel and Crouch. So Bradley Crouch got 2-game suspension. So the first 2 matches of the 2021 AFL Premiership season. They both have to attend a drug and alcohol education course, which they also have to do for their arrest as well, part of their legal obligations. I don't know whether the two count each other out or whether they have to go and sit through 2 of them. But certainly as far as the AFL penalty is concerned, they both have to go and sit that course. And Tyson Stengel got 4 weeks, which I thought was probably on the upper end of okay, and the AFL have mentioned that he got a stronger penalty because of his early season indiscretion, being drunk or driving DUI and unregistered and unlicensed and whatever the hell else. And it still beggars belief that an AFL player can not get his rego on his car. So I don't know how that works. The interesting thing was that it was the AFL that handed down the suspension, and Adam Kelly came out subsequent to that suspension being announced to say that it became clear, I think his words were, it became evident during discussions with the AFL and the AFLPA that the Crows themselves weren't in a position to hand down a sanction, which was interesting. Quite sure how that all works. I mean, the AFL handled down their penalty on the basis of bringing the game into disrepute. So it's unclear whether either of those boys received a strike under the illicit drugs policy. They, according to the drugs policy, you can get a strike for possession. You don't have to necessarily test positive for the substance. You can get done for possession. But it was interesting that they mentioned that the penalties were in accordance with bringing the AFL into disrepute. So It seems a bit each way for mine, and it seems a convenient way of the club staying out of it, and also both players, and Brad Crouch in particular, serving those penalties irrespective of where they're actually playing next season. Crouch, widely tipped to go. It will still have to serve that suspension. So, an interesting one. Godra in the chat on Twitch, and thanks for joining us on Twitch. I'm worried about Stengel. No one who is doing okay mentally has this repeated behaviour. I'm not going to stereotype Stengel, but I'm going to say that certain demographics are more prone to erratic behaviour and antisocial behaviour than others. I think the DUI was an unforgivable offence. The getting caught in possession was more stupid, because he certainly wouldn't have been an orphan when it comes to post-season recreation. So that was a bit of stupidity. It's interesting that they got caught on CCTV. Is that really how it happened? I don't know. Why didn't they catch the dealer? I don't know. Seems a bit sus to me, but in any event, I'm not too concerned about Stengel. I think he's got a bit of work to do on his character, absolutely. I think that the culture issue is a bit overstated, because I don't think he'd be the first or the last AFL player to make such a mistake. He's just silly enough to get caught. So I don't think he's going to do a hell of a lot of damage in terms of his reputation with his teammates. Certainly with the supporters, he definitely will need to lift his game in that regard. But look, in terms of Brad Crouch, I don't think it's going to affect us, because I don't think he's going to be here. Anyway, so that was that, and we can all move on from that now. The only other thing to mention on that one, a lot of people, particularly Victorian journalists like bloody John Ralph and Jay Clark, talking about the negative impact on negotiations for Crouch. Jay Clark came out and said, Geelong wouldn't offer more than $450,000 for Crouch. Just being silly. There's no way in the world that the drug suspension has any impact on his contract negotiations, which would have been well underway anyway. And there's no way in a pink fit that if Geelong are interested, that they're going to offer up $450,000. I'm still confident that we get band one for Brad Crouch. And the reason why I'm confident is because of the free hit that it gives other clubs. By stumping up a bit of extra coin, spending a bit more on salary, they're basically saving themselves a pick. So, if they think he's worth 600 and they need to stump up 7 to get it over the line, they're basically paying $100,000 to keep their first round pick. And I think that's a pretty good equation for most teams, notwithstanding what their TPP situation is, but that's fairly flexible these days. But I do think that a team will stump up the money in order to just get him for free, and it will be enough to get us banned or a pick after our first pick, which will give us pick number 2, which opens up a whole lot of possibilities, which we'll talk about in a minute. PJ Crows, yes, a rumour from one of our fantastic sources mid-year or sort of August-ish, talking about Haitley, and that's come true. Jackson nominated the Crows as his club destination of choice. And it's going to be very interesting to see how GWS play this. They've got a few other blokes like Caldwell that they need to worry about. Williams. They haven't put a lot of time into Jackson during his 2 years there. We've had a good trade relationship with GWS for the most part in the past. I can see it getting done for a late pick, certainly probably a third rounder, I reckon. I don't think it comes any more expensive than a third rounder. I don't see us spending 20 or 21 on Haitley, and I don't see GWS realistically expecting that, particularly considering we have pick 1 in the PSD. I don't expect us to use that as a stick to beat GWS over the head with, but nonetheless, it's there, it's obvious, everyone knows it, and I think as a consequence, GWS will be fairly reasonable in their trading, and we should hear that get over the line pretty early on in trade week, I'd reckon. Not much other trade news, unless someone in the chat wants to remind me of something. So I'll just run through the AFLW, and it's a pity. We'll get Nikki to talk about these girls a bit later on. It is a pity that she's not here. My understanding is that these 3 girls came from all from South Adelaide, which is great work by the South Adelaide women's. Tia Charlton at pick 4, 170 centimetre midfielder from South Adelaide. We'll just run through her highlights there for people. We don't. But look, I've watched these highlights. She looks like a very likely type. Very strong around the contest. Good overhead, and also a great goal, if you don't mind. Have a look at this one from the pocket. Just slots that through nicely. So she'll be a very good pickup, and only 18, so she's going to be around for a while. As you can see there, she can take an overhead mark. She's not all that tall, but obviously just got really good skills and good footy IQ. So she'll be a valuable addition. We had pick number 45 was Raquel I think it's Raquel, but pardon me if that's not the case. A diminutive midfielder, 152 centimetres. She actually comes from West Adelaide. So my earlier statement was incorrect. But again, she's an inside mid. She gets a lot of the ball. She's 21, I think, or 22. And she was the West Adelaide vice captain, where she averaged 18 disposals, 7 tackles and 5 clearances per game prior to the shutdown. And you can see her there with her tenacity, just running down, tackling. She's obviously a bit of an inside beast. Look at her get through that traffic. Got a bit of pace about her as well, and good foot skills. So, the girls play it pretty tough, and it seems like she'll be a valuable acquisition for them. And then Ashley Woodland at pick number 47. Ashley is a 179 midfield forward, played at North Adelaide, so I was actually completely incorrect with my earlier statement about they all came from South Adelaide. Stupid. And she was also involved with the Melbourne AFLW team prior to that, so a good pickup. She's also a very physical player, and has a good pair of hands as well, and she had a very good season for North in the SANFLW. That's a bit of a mouthful. See there that she's got good hands and good disposal as well. So we'll get Nikki to give us a bit more info, because God knows I don't know enough about these girls. I should know, but I don't. But Nick will get us amongst it when she joins us again next week. Now, what else have we got to talk about? I think that's all of factual information. Let's talk about some speculation. First of all, the talk is very strong, and I think we mentioned this last week, that James Rayleigh will be joining us as forward coach from Geelong. Obviously, nothing's been announced as yet on that one, but the talk is very strong, and I would expect when Geelong bow out or win their grand final, that we'll hear of James' appointment, which would complete our coaching staff, I would think, certainly our our line coaches. There was also news, an interview that Neil Baum did with SEN which was a real. It highlighted it was a real shame both for the club but also for Neil. He's suffering an undisclosed, what he called an unusual medical condition, which led to advice from his medical team that he shouldn't move. It looked like he was set to move in a. It looked like a consult. It sounded from what he was saying like a consulting role. I think he called it a grandfather role, grandfather of the footy department, to assist with a number of key decisions and obviously to provide some experience to what is a fairly young and inexperienced team, both administratively and also from a coaching perspective. It sounded like he was disappointed not to be able to fulfil that offer. He mentioned that his wife's from Adelaide and he's got tons of ties here in Adelaide, obviously, having spent time at the Red Lakes, but it wasn't to be. He's staying with Richmond, and that's that. And I think the indications for that were there when we ended up appointing Tom Hurley, which I mentioned, and no one seemed to know much about this one, but when we appointed Tom, it seemed like that was pretty much all of the positions filled. So, yeah, never mind. It would have been great, but it would have been worse if Barmy had come over here and then discovered his medical condition and either had to drop off or, heaven forbid, we had another Dean Bailey situation. That would have been terrible. So never mind on that one. The other one to talk about, I think, is Orazio Fantasia. Now, Fantasia is a medium or small forward, really. On his day, very dynamic, very quick, knows where the goals are, but has had a terrible run with injury over the last couple of seasons. I don't think he's got on the park much at all over the last 2 seasons, and but he's announced that he has a desire to come back to South Australia. Now, it was announced, as I understand it, correct me guys in the chat if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, his management preempted interest from Port Adelaide and Adelaide by having Orazio do a medical, and that information was sent to both the Adelaide clubs. I'm a bit uncertain about this one. On his day, he's a very good player, and he certainly burst onto the scene a few years ago during his first couple of seasons. But I just don't see where he fits, and if they're going to drop a couple off the list in terms of list sizes next year, there's not a lot of room to carry players, and I feel like he'd be a better fit at Port Adelaide. If he could get his body right and get 15 to 20 games into him, then I think they've got a definite need for a dynamic small forward. A definite need for Robbie Gray's getting on in years, and he runs through the middle a bit as well. But I think a bit of speed in that forward line underneath Charlie would be just a ticket for Port Adelaide. So I would imagine that Port would probably be more interested than we would. We've got Stengel, we've got Murphy, we've also got McHenry, who can play as a small forward. We've got a couple of good medium-sized forward prospects as well. So I don't, unless we could pick him up for nothing, and unless we had a spot on the list that the extent that I wasn't going to compromise picking anyone else, I'm happy for him to go to Port Adelaide, to be honest with you. Not much else going on in terms of Crows in trade/draft land at the moment. Logan McDonald is certainly firming as the number one pick, which is obviously ours. Nathan O'Driscoll, I think, was quoted in an interview in WA last week that the Crows were quite keen to bring both those boys over. Apparently, the Crows interviewed both those boys at Nathan's house, I believe, or one of the boys' houses, The good mates, they both play for Perth. O'Driscoll's really worked his way into the season well at league level now, and Perth, ended up making finals. Logan, I think, was second in the goal kicking from 13 games or something, and was a real revelation and one of the key reasons why Perth did make the finals over there. Placing O'Driscoll in the draft order has been interesting. I've seen a few Cal Toomey doesn't rate him at all according to his own draft, but some other pundits rate him as a first round choice. I certainly rate Nathan O'Driscoll still as a first round choice. So it wouldn't surprise me if we took them as a package deal. The interesting one then, of course, is Elijah Hollands. I have a feeling Hollands may slip a little bit, not to our number 8 pick, but there's a bit of speculation about if we do get number 2 for Brad, we'll have 1, 2 and 8, and then we'll have 20 and 21. Western Bulldogs obviously have the academy guy that they want to pick at who'll be bid on, you would think, by Adelaide at this stage at number 1. I'm just wondering whether there's something that can be done with the number 12 pick that Western Bulldogs currently have. There's some speculation about whether we would do a 2-for-1 deal with Western Bulldogs to get their number 12 pick, given that they've got a need for points, the Bulldogs. There's talk about 20 and 21, or depending on what we get for Rory Atkins, or maybe we want to shift into the 21 draft, which I'm a big fan of, given some of the talent in that draft. So, it's a bit of I think there's going to be a bit of talk about the Bulldogs pick at 12. I also think if we do get number 2 for Brad, I think there's a possibility that we might do number 2 for either Essendon or Sydney's first round pick this year and their first round pick next year. I could see that happening. I could see us taking 1 and 8 and possibly 12 to the draft and trying to get what are Essendon? Essendon are pick 6. So we would end up with 1, 6, 8 and maybe 12, with 2 being given to Essendon in that scenario for their number 6 and their first rounder next year. I could see that being a go. I could see a similar scenario playing out with Sydney. Both of those clubs, I think, would be keen to get their hands on the top end talent, because, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't rate this draft much at all. I think there's some good tools. The lad, the defender with the hyphenated name, Granger Baines, I think his name is, he's a good prospect, absolutely. I think Riley Tilthorpe is still a good prospect. There's a couple of very solid midfielders, Will Phillips, Tanner Bruin, Elijah Hollands, obviously, although he keeps being called a midfielder, but he hasn't played a lot of midfield, and he's coming off that ACL. I have a feeling we may try and do a deal into next year's draft. PJ doesn't reckon the Bombers will give up their 2021 first rounder for our pick 2. But there's other stuff that can be chucked in there. I don't know. But Essendon and Sydney are the 2 teams I think that we should be talking very hard with to see whether we can leverage their pick into next year's draft, because, as I mentioned, that draft's got some teeth. Jason Horn in particular is one that I'd really love to get. And given our trajectory over the last 6 weeks of 2020, and given games into our youth, I see us finishing bottom 4. I think there's some teams like North Melbourne, Gold Coast, Essendon, that will really push us for those bottom 3 spots. And then it's a bit of a crapshoot. You don't know what Fremantle are going to do. You don't know how Sydney are going to go. So we could be in the middle of the ladder and looking at, sort of pick 6 or 7, which I don't think is going to be good enough to get a bloke like Jason Horn based on his current trajectory. So, a lot of stuff to play out. I think November 4th, I think, is when trade, let's call it week, starts. So we've only got a couple of weeks to wait. And I think there'll be a fair bit of movement. First of all, we obviously need to know what AFL's decision is on list sizes. I think then we may see 1 or 2. We've still got a few out of contract at Adelaide. We've got DMAC out of contract, and a few others out of Galuch, and a couple of others out of contract as well. So obviously there's a bit to play out there yet. But it's a very healthy position that Adelaide are in at the moment. Even with those second round picks, 20 and 21, Tom Powell has really kicked on for Sturt in the second half of the year. We've also got Poulter, who's played pretty well, and a couple of others in the sample who have exposed form, as well as a couple of mid-tier Vic Country lads as well, that whilst they don't have exposed form, they probably would be most likely to be around that middle of the draft situation. We've obviously also got Borlase, and maybe Newchurch. PJ, what's your feel on Newchurch? I don't know. If there's a rookie, I reckon we might actually rookie him. I don't know whether we'll pick him up with an NGA. I'm not sure. His form for Centrals has been pretty low. So, Carol on Facebook reckons give North our pick 2 this year for their first pick next year. Carol, it sounds good in theory, but I reckon North with pick 3 this year, and at this stage pick 2, but probably pick 3. I reckon they'll have pick 1 next year, and I don't reckon they're going to want to. I don't reckon that they're going to want to give that up. I reckon we're going to have to speculate a little bit, and try and get in the top 4 or 5 next year if we can, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, Essendon or probably Sydney. PJ reckons he watched Newchurch play for Henley in the Amos. I agree, PJ. Speculative. His form hasn't been as good. He hasn't kicked on as much as what I think people originally thought. So again, I think it's going to come down to list size, whether we pick him up. Luke Edwards is the other one. There's speculation around whether he will nominate for the Crows as father's son, or whether he will just go into the draft. To be perfectly honest with you, I think Luke's a very good player. You'd probably rate him in an open draft as sort of end of second round, mid to end second round, at best. I don't know whether the Crows have a huge amount of interest at this late stage, so I don't know whether. I think they'd be happy to let Luke go into the open draft if that's where it fell. I think the fact that Luke hasn't nominated Adelaide is indicative of the Edwards family's desire to give him as many options as possible, and to allow other clubs to talk to him. And I think, to be honest with you, Adelaide are quite happy for those conversations to be had. And I think if there's another team that are quite interested in Luke, I think Adelaide would probably advise him not to nominate, and just to get picked up by that team. He's certainly, to me, he's a very good all-round player, but I don't see a weapon. I just don't see a weapon. And he looks a little bit cumbersome me for the type of position that he plays. So I don't know. We all had him as a first round pick this time last year, so he hasn't kicked on a bit. But then again, these kids, they develop at different rates and their bodies develop at different rates, and he may be going through a bit of a growth spurt that has just made him look a little bit slow. Who knows? But at this stage, I think Edwards will probably go to the open draft. Anyway, look, I don't think there's anything else that we can talk about at this stage. Obviously, I can't get anyone else's opinion because I've been left high and dry by my cohorts, but that's okay. I think we've got through 45 minutes pretty well. We will be back next week for another edition of the CrowCast Weekend Wrap. Obviously, we'll be wrapping up the 2 preliminary finals next week, and I think they're both going to be crackers, to be honest with you. As I mentioned, I reckon Richmond get up over Port, and I reckon Brisbane get up over Geelong, which will leave us with a rematch for the grand final. So we'll wait and see. But in the meantime, thanks everyone for sticking through this bit of a dry podcast with only me here. So I appreciate that. Don't forget to get around us on aflcrowcast.com. Join the community on our Discord channel. It's well worth it, and we're going to be ramping that up next year as well. So that'll be good to get you in on the Discord channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. All that sort of stuff. I'm going to shut up. Thanks everyone. Good on you, and we'll see you next week.